Greetings and good Friday morning, the 16th of September, 2022. I can't believe it's already the 16th of September. I mean, September's almost halfway done. We're approaching Halloween decorating season. I feel like it just turned 2022. Well, in any case, sorry about that, folks. If you're new to my channel, which, you know, not many people would be, but if you're new to my channel, if it's first time, I always open with stating the date, followed by third decade of the 21st century, because as somebody in their mid to late 40s, I remember a lot of science theorists had predicted a different present for us. Back then, it was their predictions of the future, and I'm always amazed at where we are versus what they had predicted, the good and the bad. I think technologically we're doing okay. I think socially, I don't know. Um, I also started this channel for several reasons. One of them was to provide myself an outlet. Um, what I do for a living, I have a controlled audience for 6 or more hours a day. So if I provide myself an outlet to sort of say the things I think and feel about various subjects, then I won't do it when I'm on the podium when it's most likely inappropriate. When I was doing that, I had recorded about somewhere between 15 to 20 videos, and I didn't publish anything because I sat there for a minute and it finally hit me that if I think I'm a good person. If I think I'm a good American, I think I'm a productive member of society. I go to work, I pay my taxes, I vote, all the things that I think make me a relative decent human being, to include the way that I treat others. But I think and feel this way. Why was I at that point in my life looking at others who opposed my line of thinking as bad, as some adverse adjective? Why am I demonizing or dehumanizing these people who could be just like me? We just differ on, say, socio-political concepts, ideas, etc. Um, and it forced me to do an internal look at, like, well, maybe the way forward is to respect each other's opinions, disagree, disagree spiritedly if we need to. Have spirited debates, but at the end of the day, be like, yeah, okay, cool. And then most recently, I've been reminded of something from my youth where the common practice was you don't discuss religion and politics in public settings because of how divisive they are. People can be very emotionally and personally attached to their religion and politics, and it can break down civility, it can break down decorum. And I recently recorded 3 videos, attempted to publish them, but let's just say I had some difficulty publishing them. Uh, Not because YouTube rejected them. I'm not big enough or large enough. I apologize. My cat was just harassing me, so I got like cat fur all over my face. Uh, I'm not big enough or popular enough to basically warrant YouTube's attention. But the gist of it was this. Over the last month, because I think the first video I recorded sometime after the middle of August, and then I recorded 2 more videos since then. The overarching concept was humanity. And as I consider, people having opposing opinions, and as I continue to watch commentary, one of my personal favorites is Russell Brand because he's pretty much as down the middle as you can get. Not the biggest fan of Republicans, not the biggest fan of Democrats, also not an American, but he just looks at it like a regular everyday person. Like, you lied about that. That's nonsense. That's BS. You know, you clearly represent a special interest group. I mean, he's pretty well centered. Steven Crowder, I also enjoy, as well as Ben Shapiro, Dinesh D'Souza, Larry Elder, and Dave Rubin, even Bill Maher sometimes. Specifically, when it comes to Steven Crowder, his angle is more of satirical, comedic, but he does a lot of research. Now, whether you want to make the argument his facts have been cherry picked, sure, but he also can be very divisive. And to a degree, he at least recognizes it. He's well aware of his bias, and he's well aware of when he's drawing a line in the sand, and he's well aware of when he's taking a stand. And I can admire him for that, even when I don't necessarily agree. But it got me to thinking over the last few weeks, whether it was the recent public speech by President Biden, where between the background and the things that he said, where he was basically directly accusing the population of this country who did not vote for him or does not support his party as being evil, as being problematic, as being a threat to democracy. What I find scary about that is considering his position and the country he represents. When we look back on history, all right, and that's part of the reason we study history. That's part of the reason we document current events so that, we can remember them and we can learn from them. So, most notably, when you look at Stalin, Hitler, and Mussolini, we'll just go with Hitler for now. All right. Specifically, if you want to be a real historical uh, student, you would go all the way back to the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. And I'm sure between Venezuela and Cuba and other, China and other countries, North Korea, we could probably use them as examples. But essentially, what happened was when you look at Nazi Germany, and I'm paraphrasing this and dumbing it down a little bit. Hitler rose to power in the wake of World War One, where Germany was on the losing side, and they paid a heavy toll. They paid a heavy price, reparations. Um, the what was it? The Treaty of Versailles, um, and he basically galvanized the nation of Germany, and most importantly, he radicalized his fellow countrymen and women, and he also gave them somebody to hate. He gave them an enemy within their country, within their borders. Um, and back then, it wasn't just the Jews, but it was anybody that didn't fit his idyllic profile. And I can't help but reflect on that when I think about the speech that President Biden gave and how many, times either he said it or another a Democratic elected official representing the Democratic Party has used very specific rhetoric of a divisive nature, whether that's a direct call to action or, basically accusing whole populations of this country who just differ in opinion of being a threat to democracy. In other words, attempting to radicalize and unify the other half of the country to what end, I don't know. And I've mentioned this before, just not in the same context. The reason that scares me is because if you keep it as simple as red and blue, where part of the reason I started this channel is I think the vast majority of us are probably somewhere in the purple. If each party represents 100 solid things, like their Magna Carta, their raison d'etre, is 100 items, and the Republicans represent this, and the Democrats represent that, and it's literally if you want to run for office, it's like, well, who checks more boxes for you? Well, I guess I'm a Democrat, or I guess I'm a Republican, even though there could be a tremendous amount of things you disagree with. Um, so I've mentioned it before that if you keep it in terms of left versus blue, well, right now the left appears to be in charge. Whether it's Congress, the Senate, the White House, they appear to be in charge. One thing they're trying to do is disarm the populace. They're trying to erode the capabilities and capacity of the Second Amendment because they know exactly what it's for. A lot of people think the Second Amendment is, essentially for gun enthusiasts, gun nuts, rednecks, and people who want an armory inside their house. They quickly either forget or dismiss or suspend belief when it comes to the actual true fidelity of the Second Amendment. Because of the reason this country was founded on and the principles it was founded on, the Second Amendment was there to allow the citizens to arm themselves and protect themselves, to include, but not limited to, the capacity to purchase everything that the military owns. Once again, not to repeat myself, but the military doesn't produce anything. The military does not own manufacturing. That has to come from the civilian marketplace via DoD contracts. All right? So civilian corporations produce firearms, produce munitions, tanks, cannons, jets, you name it. So if you can pay the price and you can maintain it and arm it, you should own a tank. You should own a jet. And for those who are not aware, we have a tremendous, tremendous amount of restrictions already in place. All right. Gun laws, gun restrictions, we have plenty of them. All right. And I've made this statement before. When it comes to gun violence, we have a people problem. All right. The gun is just a tool. We have a people problem. But I digress. The whole point was because of what our founding fathers and their parents were fleeing from Europe, monarchies, tyrannical governments. The goal was to defend yourself not just from invaders, but from your government exceeding the grasp of its authority. They don't have authority. We are a free society that created a government to protect our freedoms. That was the intent. Protect our freedoms. We elected a body politic to essentially protect our freedoms. All right. Just like, why are we so interested in the millionaire who became a one-time politician? Why wouldn't we be more concerned with the politicians who became lifelong millionaires? But I digress. So the Second Amendment was there to protect us from the government, but notice how the left is trying to disarm us, which also means if the left, who has political figures that are attempting to divide the country, and is now sponsoring big businesses, credit card companies to create an informal gun registry. Who do you think has the guns? Between left and right, who do you think has the guns? Who do you think has the means and the capacity to defend themselves? Do you really think, if it comes down to it, that law enforcement and military is actually going to obey those orders? I'm just curious. Because trust me, this is hinging upon the concept of humanity. So I'm very concerned with the divisive rhetoric. I'm concerned with that speech and the things that he said and the things that he said in the past. And I still, to this day, don't believe that this was the most fair election. You expect me to believe, just based on his conduct alone, more people in the United States voted in the past election than any other previous election. And of all things, they voted specifically for him, the guy who has no idea where to go when he's done giving a speech if he manages to mumble his way through it. But that leads to the other problem. I despise him. I despise the current president and I despise the current vice president. I, based on historical references, despise their party. I feel as though if there was a way to do it at the conclusion of the Civil War, that, you know, body politic, that political party should have been disbanded and discontinued and disallowed to practice government. I think I think our elected leaders at the time had a little bit more foresight than that and realized, okay, well, you can get rid of the name, but you can't get rid of the idea. You can't get rid of the ideology, you can't get rid of the opinion, unless, of course, you purge the Confederate South of all democratic ideological persons, which would have essentially been a genocide. All right, in order to purge the concept of slavery, the concept of segregation, the concept of white supremacy, which was predominant in the South in the mid to late 1800s during the time of the Civil War, that would have affectionately been a genocide. And that's also based on the assumption that everybody in the South thought that way and everybody in the North felt differently, which we know, human beings being human beings, is not the case. Some people were very racist, but they happened to be living in the North and they fought for the North and they represented the North because of geography. That's where they were. Some people in the South were not racist at all. They just happened to be in the South, you know, geography. So I understand why it didn't happen, but at the same time, I also look at it from a different perspective, which is while you may not have been able to purge Germany of all Nazi sympathizers and people who aligned with the ideologies of Nazi Germany, the Nazi Party does not exist in the same form it once did. My limited understanding is that there is still a small contingent of Nazi representation in Germany. They still have a political party. They just don't have the same fervor and population density they once did. Uh, it would probably be akin to some of our smaller political parties. So, why do I bring all that up? If I can recognize my own disdain, if I can recognize my own emotions, I also recognize the fact that when I saw people attacking Republicans, I was getting agitated. And then I caught myself. It took a while, all right? It only happened within the last month, but I caught myself and I was like, "Oh God, what's the difference? If I openly despise Democrats and everything they stand for, with rare exception, right? Like Tulsi Gabbard is still a Democrat, but I can tolerate her. And I'm sure there's probably a few others that are in that same boat. But beyond that, why why can't another portion of the population feel the exact same way towards, say, Republicans or conservatives or Team Red? Just like if in 2016 I utterly despised Hillary, and I also, like I said, despised the Democratic Party. Now, Trump was not my preferred candidate of choice. My wife and I always look for viable third party options because, we're not exactly in love with the Republican Party, but we feel as though when it comes directly to impacting us, the Republican Party uh, leaves leaves less of an impact. All right. I know for some people, whether it's truthful or not, I'm a real simple individual. I mean, yes, I've got 3 degrees. I'm technically educated. I know how to research. I know how to write a paper. But at the end of the day, I'm a pretty simple person. Check my phone. It's going off. Could be important. Survey says, oh, hang on. Anyways, um, not too terribly important. So, unfortunately, we're usually left with one of two choices, Democrat or Republican. So I didn't vote for Trump nearly as much as I voted against Hillary. So when I remembered that, and I remembered, God, I really just can't stand, Biden or Harris, and I was like, well, why can't my other fellow Americans share the same emotions towards Trump? I mean, objectively speaking, removing as much emotion as possible, right? If I can despise the Democratic Party in principle, if I can also despise the current president and his vice president, whether whether I feel justified or not, whether I can justify it, whether I can defend it or not, and others can't wrap their heads around it, why can't the opposite be true? Why can't others despise the Republican Party? Why can't others despise Trump? If I can despise Biden, why shouldn't they be allowed to despise Trump? Was I literally just getting agitated because I hated their candidate and I was trying to support my candidate and they're yelling at my candidate? You know, the only thing I will say is if life is on a scale, I do believe in our country the scale is improperly balanced, as in it's imbalanced. Um, Part of my problem and part of the reason I started this channel was I came to the conclusion that the overwhelming majority of media outlets are on the side of the left. And I've made this statement numerous times in previous videos. The solution is the problem is the solution. In order to preserve the First Amendment, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, the government once again cannot own the press and cannot be involved in the press. That could be considered propaganda. However, the solution becomes the problem. So we have the First Amendment, which is the freedom of speech, freedom of the press. Ugh. All right, now I got the both of you up here. Um, don't you dare start going at it. So the press can be privately owned, and those private companies can have their own personal socio-political agenda, and they can cherry pick facts, they can selectively edit, and they can create stories that don't tell the whole truth but support their political agenda. And I mean, you see this all the time: MSNBC, CNN, ABC, CBS, NBC. I mean, for crying out loud, on a small tangent here, I've been communicating with the one and only person who comments on my channel, Miss Stace Cataline or Catalin. You have to let me know if it's Line or Lynn. Um, when it comes to nerdy stuff and getting all meta on programs and whatnot, my wife and I have just reached a culminating point where if the agenda becomes a priority and the story becomes secondary, so the storytelling is lackluster because the agenda is the priority, whether it's woke, whether it's some socio-political agenda, whether it's right or left, and it ruins the story. So the story's less organic, the story's forced because the agenda is the priority, and people are voting with their dollars, or more importantly, they're voting with their viewership. The CW is basically having to scrap so many shows, and they're basically doing the etch a sketch for those of you that get the reference, because a lot of their stories became infected by woke culture, and the stories became polluted where the story became secondary to the agenda, and when the agenda dominated, it ruined the storytelling, and people left, viewers left, and myself and my wife included. So we've been watching older stuff, right? So you know, there, uh, tangent over. So where does it come to, right? Again, this whole conversation's about humanity. And I was like, well, I think I recognize the fact that if I can feel that way, others can too. But how do we move forward? And that's where I don't claim to have the answer, because if I can feel negative emotions and they're allowed to feel negative emotions, how do we move forward? Personally, I think we need new third parties. Um, we need a new grassroots movement. Uh, I think I think when you look at the electoral Congress, right? So each state has a certain amount of electoral votes based on their congressional districts, and right now we have a winner takes all. So if there's four people running for office, the same office in a particular state, in this case, the president of the United States, right? Well, if we have, obviously, you're going to have a Democrat and a Republican, and then you can have, say, a Libertarian and an Independent. All right. As it stands right now, each individual can win a district. Like by popular vote, they can win a district. The way it works is the candidate who gets the most popular votes from the state gets all the electoral votes. So, case in point, I believe here in North Carolina, we just recently went up. So, I think we have 16 electoral votes. So, we have 14, maybe it's 17. So we either have 14 or 15 congressional districts. So that means we have 14 or 15 congressmen and women that go to D.C. And of course, we have our two senators. My opinion is if a candidate wins the congressional district, they get that electoral vote. I don't know what to do with the senatorial vote, but, and I've made that video before. So that's one way we can start to erode the monopoly on the two-party system, because I feel like part of what's dividing us is the military. Not the military, good Lord, the media. I feel like the media is dividing us because depending on how you present a story, all right, you can convey a story in a way that stirs up emotions, especially if it speaks to somebody. And as I was saying, being a simple person, looking at, impact and whatnot, if the Republican Party is going to reduce the price of gasoline at the pump, I'm all for it. If the Republican Party is going to reduce the price of average goods like groceries and whatnot, because my wages have not increased, my wages have not adjusted for inflation. All right, so I'm getting paid the exact same amount of money for the exact same day's work, but milk costs more, bread costs more, basic subsidies, basic things like that cost more, gasoline costs more. So my cost of living has gone up, but my wages have not. And if the Republican Party can reduce my cost of living, I'm all for that. All right. Democrats love to increase the size of the government. What was it, like 83,000 more IRS agents? To do what? To do what exactly? Part of our country, if for no other reason than this one, was founded on the mind your damn business. Stay out of my life. Let me live free. That's why we have that separate flag. Don't tread on me. Because part of tyrannical governments, part of tyranny and monarchy is I'm up in your business. I'm all up in your stuff. That is the mantra of the Democratic Party. And what utterly baffles me, and where I try to tread lightly, because I don't want to necessarily be like the current president and name call and slander other people, is why would anybody want to increase the amount of control of the government? Because they never give it back. Once you give them power, they never succeed that power. They never give it back unless extreme circumstances. All right. For those of you that utterly despise the expansion of governmental power, governmental oversight after the events of 9/11, okay, well then put the shoe on the other foot, right? Okay, now a different party is going to do the exact same thing, but just in a different capacity. I don't want the government in my business. I'm not doing anything illegal. I'm not doing anything, below board. I just want to go about my life. I want to live my life. I want to be able to go to work, do my job, come home, and enjoy my time off. I don't want to go to work, then come home, and then have to deal with government entities getting all up in my shit. And I feel like everybody else would feel the same. And what scares me is people that are voting for the party that sponsors this may not realize the consequences of their actions. And if you look at it from a historical perspective, objectively, remove all emotion, only one political party has ever sought to divide the country in one way, shape, or form. Ever. Through rhetoric, through ideology, through policy. And it's always, always, always been the Democratic Party. They formed the Confederacy. They succeeded from the Union. They started the Civil War. They were the party of the KKK. They were the party of Jim Crow. They were the party of segregation. All right. They were the party that opposed civil rights. They were the party that opposed the women's right to vote and the Voting Act of 1965. Yes, a Democratic president, Lyndon Johnson, overturned it, much to the chagrin of his party, before they realized, oh, snap, you just gained the trust and confidence of all the people we despise. So now everybody we look down upon that once looked at us as the enemy is now looking at us like their savior. We just traded the cotton plantation for the welfare plantation. Look at modern day rhetoric. There's only one party that's calling out others. There's only one party that's calling for division, calling for protests, calling for riots. All right? Talking about modern day racism. All right? And I've had some people on my channel leaving comments, and I'm assuming they're other than white. So perhaps they've invested heavily in the concept of intersectionality. They've invested heavily in the concept of victimization through marginalization. Basically, if you're not white, if you're not hetero, and if you're not male, um, you're a hero because you're a victim. You're a victim of oppression. You're a victim of systemic racism in the third decade of the 21st century. If all of that stuff existed, then we shouldn't have been able to elect a half white, half black president. If all of that existed, we shouldn't have been able to elect a half black, half Indian vice president. If all these things existed, you couldn't go from state to state and look at governors and mayors and congressmen and women and senators who are anything other than white with like Johnson and Smith last names, all right? Traditionally white last names, right? We are quite diverse, but for some reason, the Democratic Party has found some form of social currency and equity in telling people how victimized you've been. I just don't believe in that, but it is what it is. In which case, I don't think that's the solution. I think humanity is the solution, and I'll switch it up a little bit here. And this topic was a bit rough the last time I approached it at the beginning of the calendar year, but I don't care. It's my channel. You don't like it? Stop watching. Move on. Don't comment. Don't like. Oh my God, I don't care. But here we go. So first and foremost, one of the cashiers at my local grocery store, for all intents and purposes, appears to be trans. They're 6'1", 6'2", looks to have been born male. In many cases, presents female. Makeup, nails, hair. Just some subtle things. I don't have to get it. I don't have to understand it, but it has nothing to do with what we're doing. When I go through, I don't ignore their checkout line. Literally, when I'm checking out, I'm like, all right, who's available? All right. I've been through their checkout line numerous times. We're there to conduct a transaction. I'm the customer. You're the employee. Our transactions, to include personally, are civil and humane. I just treat them like a person. I'll add another topic to that. I understand the pronoun issue is important to some people. All right. I understand gender identity and or gender expression is important to some people. I understand individual expression is important to some people. It may not hold the same value for me, but I can respect the fact that it does for those individuals. So I've been working desperately on trying to find a more humane approach where normally, from my upbringing and whatnot, I like to say sir and ma'am. Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am. And I'm going to cover a few different topics on this spectrum here, right? So, first and foremost, what I despise is this trend within society where if I'm extending some humanity, if I'm extending some civility, if I'm extending kindness and courtesy, and I'm practicing decorum, and I'm off my game and I use sir or I use ma'am, all right? The automatic assumption, because you're one of those individuals that puts value on these other topics, and because you put value on these topics, you've also invested heavily in the concept of being offended, in the concept of being a victim, constantly looking for opportunities to be victimized, all right, so that you can wave your victim flag and be elevated as some sort of a hero. So I haven't had it anywhere else other than maybe this channel. But when it comes to this individual, we're very polite and cordial to each other. And I think as far as pronouns go, I don't go any further than you. Um, it's been a while, but I'm pretty sure you is a pronoun. Um, but humanity, he, she, they are always kind and courteous to me. I'm always kind and courteous to them. Whenever I go through the line, I'm always checking out the tattoos so as to not hold anybody else up. I always do it very quickly, like, okay, what haven't I seen? And I remember one time he, she, they commented, well, there's more you can't see. And I was like, I know that feeling. I've got two big pieces on my chest and my back that are normally covered up. Uh, and then I think we made some sarcastic references and we moved on. I'm sure there are people out there that would find a way to pick this apart because it doesn't suit their agenda, and because if they know anything about me, know that I identify as heterosexual, Caucasian male, they would want to find a way to pick this apart, whether due to my pigmentation, my sexual orientation, my gender identity, because those individuals have lost their humanity. They have lost their civility. And we need to find a way to come back to that. We need to find a way to go back to being more humane and civil to one another. And on that note, it brings me to another issue, right? Whether it's politics, whether it's modern social trends, part of the reason we used to say don't discuss religion and politics is because if you're emotionally invested, if you're heavily invested in those topics, the tendency is either conversion or selling or basically like intrusion. I'm a big fan of you do you and I'll do me. I'll go about my day, you go about your day. If we disagree, do we have to find out? Do we have to probe and find out if there's anything we disagree on so that we can? And I think if we practice a little more humanity, that shouldn't be the way it goes. Okay, you know, whether you're black, brown, purple, yellow, red. Hey, what's up? Well, you're just saying that because I'm. No, I'm just saying that because I'm a kind, decent human being. Go fuck yourself. In fact, do me a favor. Why don't you just kill yourself? I'll bury you and plant a tree because instead, I'll replace you, the oxygen thief, with a tree that will produce oxygen. Let me guess, you're a fan of climate change, right? Here, let's do your part. Let's reduce you as a carbon footprint. Because those are the kind of emotions I start to feel when people lack civility, when people lack humanity. Why do I say that? And why do I say the whole religion and politics thing? If I'm a big fan of you do you and I'll do me, here's the thing. Why do we have to impose ourselves on others? Why do we have to push ourselves on others? Whether you're right, whether you're left, why does it have to be that way? Right now, as somebody who's probably a little bit more left of center, I feel as though a lot of concepts, a lot of thoughts, a lot of ideologies that are popular on the left are being shoved into the zeitgeist. They're being shoved down my throat. All right? Most humans follow a similar brainwave. If you force something on somebody, very few individuals are willing to accept. And if you demonstrate a lack of tolerance for anybody who feels differently, you're only going to increase that person's steadfast dedication to opposing you. If you keep telling people that they're racist, specifically, if you keep telling average white Americans born well after the 1960s, born well after the 1964 Civil Rights Act, born well after the 1965 Voting Act, if you keep telling people like me, born in 76 and younger, that we're racist, we're privileged, we're the source of all evil. At some point, your lack of tolerance, your intolerance is going to become a problem. And if you keep pushing and keep pushing, depending on the context and the circumstances, we're going to have to respond. And how we respond depends on the circumstances at large. All right. Does anybody want that? Maybe. I know the Democratic Party's calling for it, but you know, what's missing from the equation? Humanity. Humanity. I mean, how many people really have somebody else to blame other than themselves? How many people are legitimately in this country, and I mean legit, oppressed, versus how many of them are not taking advantage of the opportunities provided by this country, but instead make excuses? Almost on a daily basis, I might make an excuse for at least one thing per day. All right. Like, why am I not outside doing yard work? Well, it's still a bit early and the dew and the grass is wet. And that's an excuse. All right. Versus I might find myself later in the day when it's hotter out, like, God, this is such a bad idea. Why did I wait? Missed an opportunity. Because right now, uh, places aren't open for business. So I can't go run those errands. So, you know, as I said, if we negate humanity, if we negate civility, if we negate modern decorum, and we allow those things to be broken down, then we entertain these other concepts. We entertain these notions of fragility, victimhood, oppression, things that I don't agree exist. Do I believe certain people, are born more privileged and advantaged than others, regardless of complexion, regardless of ethnicity? Yeah, my kids have it way better than I did. And I hope they understand and appreciate that. And I try to remind them of it every day. And I try to show them and demonstrate to them how much worse it could be, how much better they have it, in order for them to form an appreciation. So, yeah, things can, those things exist, but the opportunities are there. Well, the schools suck. Well, why is that? Is that because the students, when they're there, conduct themselves in such a poor fashion that education cannot take place? Well, that's because the white man did this. Did the white man do this? Or did people actively choose to congregate in the same area? Because birds of a feather tend to flock together. You know what I'm saying? I'm, let's put it into a complexion that I have more social currency to talk about. Um, Trailer parks and trailer trash. If they tend to be predominantly white, birds of a feather. Birds of a feather. That's all I'm going to say. So I know this video has been going on for quite a while. Trust me, when I put the other three together, it was well over 90 minutes. I'm going to fall short of that on purpose. I honestly believe what we need more of is humanity. I understand and appreciate certain concepts are important to some people, less important to others. Things that are important to me are probably less important to somebody else. It's just the way it is. I don't have to force myself upon them. I don't have to force my thoughts and opinions upon them. Um, to this day, I still catch myself on certain occasions espousing some of my beliefs and opinions. But then when I catch myself, I'm like, hey, look, this is me. You do you. You be free to do you. But what I would encourage you to do is educate yourself so that if you have an opinion on something, you can stand behind it because you understand it. And then I apologize for going down that rabbit hole because, again, I'm trying to maintain that humanity. And it reminds me, my wife and I finally linked up with some friends of ours from previous duty stations that we hadn't seen in like 18 years. And the funny thing is, we live about 2.5 hours away, but and neither one of us are over willing to travel. Um, so their daughter is now 25. Uh, Went to college for 5 years and graduated. And either in college or high school, she, because of her friends and because of her internal stuff, anxiety, etc., um, she got really, really involved with the LGBTQ plus community, specifically drag and trans. Most of her friends, she's really, really big in the drag community. She doesn't do drag herself, but she loves the whole drag concept and the drag community. And she's a big supporter of the LGBTQ plus and whatnot. And from what her mom told me, She's asexual, but is poly polyamorous, basically what I would know as bisexual. So she likes both men and women from what I understood, and I could be wrong, but she's not currently interested in a sexual relationship, which makes me wonder how many people prior to a label, prior to a diagnosis, were asexual from the get-go but understood and appreciated, you know, uh, sex is the known method of procreation. So in order to procreate, one had to perform sex, but otherwise didn't enjoy sex for pleasure. Probably a lot. And it got me to thinking in that moment as we were conversing, and I had like this epiphany. And of course, translating it from my head to my mouth are two different things. And I'm going to try to use this to close out this video because I'm already over 45 minutes. When I think about humanity and I think about civility and I think about, okay, we as a society have the ability to determine what we agree upon as a society as acceptable. Case in point, for the most part, we as a society used to agree that grown adults being sexually attracted to minors, and I don't mean older teens who are eligible to consent, I mean the playground age. All right. It used to be genuinely accepted or generally accepted as a society that that was wrong. We always understood that within a society there's always going to be a fringe population of people. It wasn't that long ago in the timeline of humanity that tattoos were taboo. Tattoos were fringe, and people who had tattoos were considered outside mainstream society. All right. To include, oftentimes they were considered to be not necessarily productive members of society or not high moral characters, high level thinkers. You look around nowadays, tattoos are pretty commonplace. All right. Um, so it got me to thinking. And, progress can be a good thing, if managed appropriately, because moderation is the key to everything. Excess is where we get into danger. So there's good progress, and then there's a level of progress that gets to a negative point. All right. I feel as though my generation, within the time frame of maybe a decade and some change, my generation, born in the 70s, we began to explore societal boundaries. All right. Where the door was previously closed and society had agreed, no, no, that's not good enough for mainstream. I feel as though my generation began to open more doors and began to normalize things, or at least some combination or variation of those things. All right. Certain mental health issues, which used to be taboo and not spoken about, now we're at a point where everybody's got a mental health issue. Everybody has a therapist. Everybody has a diagnosis. It's almost its own form of social currency. You don't have social currency unless you have some mental health issue, some emotional crisis, some reason for a therapist. All right. I see a therapist because after everything I've been through in life, the military, combat, losing my son, I felt this sense of entitlement to express my opinion. So I see a therapist for compulsion control. When I'm on the podium, I got to be professional. I've got to be down the middle. All right. Content, 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 nothing personal. So I see someone to assist with that. If nothing else, I have a reminder every week. I got to see this person. Why do I see this person? Because of this. Oh, yeah. Don't do that. Don't continue those behaviors. But I digress. I feel like my generation, whether a few years before me, even a few years after me, we opened the door to the possibility of exploring new concepts, mental health conditions, whether it was autism, whether it was this, whether it was that, homosexuality. All right. I feel like we opened the door to, hey, what is so wrong with these things? Why can't the gays, be productive members of society? Can they still earn a living? Can they still perform a function? So he's a dude who likes dudes, or she's a chick who likes chicks. Can they still perform their task? At the end of the day, what we're doing is we're forming judgments of about what they do in their private life, in their private time, with whom they choose. Because it conflicts with what we consider to be normal, at the end of the day, I think, my generation started to look at objectivity as in, well, I should only be judging this person as an employee. When they come to work, do they do their job? Yes. When they leave here, do I approve? No. Does that have any impact on their job performance? No. And I think my generation opened the door to that. I think the generation that came after exploited it. And I think before we found balance, we found equilibrium, I think the generation that came after me pushed the boundary a little too far, and we find ourselves in this crisis we're in now, where I believe what we need to do is find balance, and I think we can start with humanity and civility. If it's important to you, remember that it's important to you. It does not have to be important to somebody else. They don't have to share your thoughts. They don't have to share your opinions. They can still be a good person. They can still be a productive member of society. But for various reasons, the sum total of their life experiences, that's how they think. That's what's important to them. If they're not going to shove themselves onto you, then you shouldn't shove yourselves onto them. Let's get back to some humanity. Let's get back to some civility. I think that's a good way forward. Is it going to fix anything right away? Probably not, because right now, whether it's the internet, the media, all of the above, whether they still are fringe, whether they still are micro, but they're being projected as macro, they're always going to be there. All right. And just like the dot coms, right? When the dot com thing blew up and people lost millions because they overly invested thinking that it was the future, you're going to have those outliers. You're going to have people that have found their niche, they have found their place in the ecosystem, and they're still going to hold on to some of these concepts, the victim mentality, the white evil, white privilege, all these different things, right? And I don't know what we can do for them. But I honestly believe that the vast majority of us are not necessarily red or blue, we're more purple. And I honestly believe the vast majority of us can find some equilibrium if we just practice a little bit more humanity. If we stop demanding that everybody thinks and feels exactly the same way we do and just accept the fact that we're all different, all right? We can all be wonderful human beings, and we don't have to accuse us of being less than human just because we disagree. But you know what? I didn't come up with that on my own. Honestly, the majority of my thoughts have been inspired by, of all people, none other than Russell Brand. And I'll say this, his videos are no longer than 20 minutes. Go check him out. He's wonderful. Um, Whenever I'm feeling a certain way about a topic or whatever, I'll just watch his video, and the way that he presents it, it's just like, yeah, that shit sucks. But okay, let's go on. So, with that in mind, if you made it this far, I apologize for the length of this video. Um, it's shorter than what the other one could have been. Let me know what you think. All right. Do you think we need more humanity, more civility? We need to stop demanding that everybody accepts our way of thinking, our view of the world. Just keep it to yourself and treat everybody as if you'd want to be treated. Let me know. If you disagree, if you agree, I want to hear from you, because ultimately, I think the other way we move forward is if we get past our differences and we start talking to one another. Okay? It's no different than, sports, right? Why does somebody have to be evil? Why does somebody have to be unworthy of their humanity? Why does somebody have to be considered less than human if they like a sports team other than yours? That may be an oversimplified reference, but that's my point. So let me know what you think. I'd love to hear from you. Otherwise, if you're not familiar with my channel, I don't care if you like, I don't care if you subscribe, I don't care if you hit the notification bell. I just want to hear what you think, because I'm not popular enough. I'm not monetized. I think I have all of 22 subscribers. I think I average 2 views per video. So I'm not making any money off of this, and I apologize if there's long periods of time in between my videos. This is a hobby. I don't make any money off of it. But I digress. I just want to hear from you. So if you leave a comment and you carry on the conversation and you keep the conversation going, I really appreciate it. And Stace, you know I always look forward to hearing back from you. You're awesome. See you next time.